Please welcome Farhan Thawar.
Hey everyone, my name is Farhan, and I want to talk about Copilot that we use very happily at Shopify. Now, what's interesting about thinking about Copilot is that I want to produce a few guideposts. And the reason I want to talk about some guideposts first is that in order to get the benefit of Copilot in your engineering team, you probably have to think much more holistically about your company and about AI. Because what you don't want to have happen is you introduce Copilot and the rest of your company is not really thinking through its AI strategy. And that can mean AI for employees, AI for customers and partners. And so you do really want to make sure you're getting the benefit of Gen AI everywhere, and of course through Copilot, but I want to walk you through how we got there. And so what I'm going to talk about are three things: Shopify engineering and GitHub. We're a long-standing partner of GitHub. 2, how we think about LLMs at Shopify. And of course, the meat, everything to do with Copilot and engineering. And so first off, let's talk about Shopify. So for those who don't know, Shopify is typically the brand behind the brand. We power, I think the world's best D2C sites. And usually, if you are outside of Amazon and shopping online and you've had a great experience, it's Shopify. Thomas was actually wearing the same shoes I'm wearing, which are from Vessi, a Shopify merchant. And so anytime you're actually thinking through how we power all of this, it's actually because of the great work our engineering team and product team and design team built. And we power over millions and millions of merchants all over the world, hundreds of millions of buyers. And my PR team messaged me and said, hey, we're almost at $1 trillion of GMV through the platform. So pretty amazing that what we can build together. And just some fast facts, because it's actually interesting when you're powering a platform like this, and again, we use GitHub for all of our workflow, that what we can build together. And so the first off is actually we built an amazingly highly converting, beautiful checkout. And it's powered in an ecosystem such that we can do, it sounds like these small numbers, right? 5,000 checkouts a minute, but it auto scales up to 8 times that. And what's amazing about that, again, is we use a lot of automation to enable what we call flash sales. So you can imagine someone like Kim Kardashian dropping a new lipstick, or Aloe Yoga dropping a new color, or Taylor Swift dropping some merch. They don't always tell us when they do these things on social media, and so our infrastructure has to automatically scale up to support all of this amazing load. And of course, all throughout with an amazing, beautiful experience such that you get what you want to actually get from these vendors. So really, really cool infrastructure, and of course, some stats up there also on just how much we have to support. And just because we're coming into the season, probably the busiest time for internet retail, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? The Thanksgiving shopping weekend, or weeks now, because people tend to have their sales earlier and earlier. And what happens with Shopify is every time we have a Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the internet goes crazy, our infrastructure goes crazy, and what happens is we set a new baseline for what's possible on the internet. For some of our merchants, when we do a launch, it ends up being the largest sale in internet retail history, and then the next week, it's the largest sale again in internet history, and then the next week, it's the largest sale in internet history. So these things keep going, and we set a new baseline. Just an example of what a flash sale looks like, because people tend to get interested in this infrastructure. Kind of like nothing, nothing, nothing. Huge spike in traffic, and then it curls off from that one merchant. So you can imagine this is just one of the millions and millions of merchants on the Shopify platform, again, scaling up and scaling down. It's pretty nuts and amazing to see on the infrastructure side. And again, this is what I talk about in terms of setting a new baseline. This is from a few years ago, so every time we have a new Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all of our infrastructure ramps up, and then we have this little bit of respite over the December period where it comes down a little bit, but then it actually stays up that high. It's pretty nuts because we end up just literally saying, okay, cool, Black Friday, Cyber Monday of 2021 is now just Tuesday of 2023. Yeah, pretty nuts. I want to talk a little bit about GitHub because, of course, we are a large GitHub customer, have been for a long time. We have about 4,000 folks in R&D. What's interesting about that is it's not only engineers who contribute to GitHub. At Shopify, product managers, UX, data, they're all using GitHub for a lot of their workflow. We have about 300 public repos. right? About 5,000 private repos. It's kind of like Slack channels, right? There's more of those than there are people in your company. Same with the Shopify, lots of repos. I think we retired or archived 2,000 repos just last week. So we're always trying to make sure that we've got the most effective infrastructure there. Over 10 million lines of code. We joke that we have maybe not a joke, we do have the largest Ruby code base in the world, right? And as we try to simplify, maybe that's a good thing and not a good thing as we try to delete lots of code as well. We do about 1,500 deploys per day. Like I mentioned, over 4,000 contributors and over 100,000 commits per month. Pretty insane and how much we use the GitHub infrastructure to get our work done. So now I want to talk a little bit about LLMs. So in order to then get to where we want to get to, which is empowering and having high productivity in your eng team, I think you really need to think about the entire AI journey of your company. And the first thing that we always think about is making sure that we are bringing LLMs and Gen AI to everyone. Because the panacea is actually having AI to your customers, right? Everybody wants to build something and have AI show up in front of their customers. So you can, whether it's a chatbot, whether it's an experience such that it's magical, you want to make sure that your employees have that experience also at work. And for Shopify, that started with our merchants. We launched, when ChatGPT came out November 30th, 2022, within 2 months we had product descriptions. I was actually chatting with a merchant before this, Glad and Young, and they were talking about how they use this all the time to actually enable very quick product descriptions. So imagine that you are selling soap, and now you have written down all of the interesting aspects of your soap product. You can press a button, and magically you can have an SEO-friendly, highly playful tone, if you want, product description. If you are someone who could do maybe dozens of these per day, you can now do hundreds. We actually have the moniker Magic that we use for that. So all over the Shopify surface area, you'll see a little magic symbol, and it'll allow you to do things. It'll allow you to create email subject lines, product headings, all the things that you can imagine that can be magical for your merchants. Again, the reason that we think through this for all of our surfaces is so that we can ensure that our employees are thinking about these tools, right? Our merchants use AI for our help center. Again, we look through all our documentation and allow them to easily search. And we even have something called Sidekick, which you may have heard about 2 days ago when Sam Altman had it on screen at OpenAI Demo Day. He talked about how we're working with them to build the amazing Sidekick, which is like a co-founder for your business. The second surface that we talk about is our buyers. And again, the first one is Shop AI, which again allows you as a buyer to find a direct-to-D2C brand that you would love. And of course, again, I talked to this merchant outside, Glad and Young, and then they use the inbox feature, which is basically asking questions from buyers. Hey, how do I exchange an item? Do you have this in red? Are there any sales on? And again, all powered by Gen AI. And I know I'm repeating myself. You want to make sure that you are thinking about this in your company, because having Gen AI in just one workflow likely is not going to succeed. Didn't want to leave our partners and third-party ecosystem out to lunch. We have over 10,000 apps on the ecosystem. And now even our merchants can use AI summaries in their tools to determine whether they want to install one of these apps. But in order to get all of these things, you have to start with your employees. This is where Copilot comes in, but this is where lots of tools come in. We are pretty big adopters of tools. And this is an interesting chart that just showed when the Gen AI revolution started. Again, after ChatGPT, everyone started predicting, where will the productivity come from? Right? If you look at this chart, the first one was sales. We think we can automate sales emails, sales content. The second one was marketing content. And the third one, which surprised me, engineering. Right? Why would engineering be up there? Right? And the idea, and we're seeing it with Copilot now, but it was actually a little bit of a puzzle for folks, saying, why would engineering show up there? What we say to our employees is reach early and often for AI tools. We use these tools very regularly and early because, again, we want to make sure our employees are thinking about this. And what I would tell you, what I tell my parents, is reach for an AI tool early and often, because you are not sure what's going to work and what's not going to work. And you can see some of the things we do here, whether it's Copilot, whether it's ChatGPT, or even Midjourney with our design team. Don't even think about Copilot until you've thought about AI for your company. I think I've said it enough. And one of the things we do say is, don't think about AI as a replacement for jobs. Think of it as a replacement for tasks. That is exactly what it's doing. We're not trying to replace engineers. We're trying to replace the tasks that some engineers do. Let's talk about Copilot. So this is an email I sent to Thomas after he got the job in 2021. I highlighted two things here. The first thing is the date, right? December 2021. This is a year before ChatGPT. And the second thing is, I highlighted is all engineers. This is a real email. I was like, I want Copilot, I want it now, and I want it for everybody. And what was amazing about this was, one, and I talked to the GitHub team this morning, Thomas did give it to me and all of my engineers, which is thousands. The GitHub team did not know that he did that. That's number one. And then two, what's funny is, in the summer of 2022, he came to Toronto, where I live, and he messaged me and said, can I meet up with you? And I kept trying to dodge him because I was pretty sure he was trying to get me to pay for Copilot. And we were using it for free. So we are now a happy paying customer. But back then, I was like, I'm going to keep using this for free as long as I can. And so I'll show you some stats on what the adoption was. But why did we end up choosing Copilot? There are, competitor products. I meet with lots of startups. You're watching Twitter, X, seeing newsletters, and you'll see lots of AI tools coming out, especially for code completion and for engineering productivity. For us, it was a few reasons. The first was we did not want to increase our trust circle. So at Shopify, we think about who has access to our data. Our code is in GitHub. Because our code is in GitHub, we are not increasing the trust circle to include Copilot. Right? That makes it very easy for us to say, let's try it. That's number one. Number two is GitHub and OpenAI and Microsoft, like all these partners that are working together, are innovating very, very quickly. You saw Thomas this morning talking about all the things that they are launching. Right? We've been lucky to be early access on some of those. And the curve of innovation is what you have to make a bet on, not on what Copilot has today. You can look at other tools and say, oh, we can try this one, we can try that one, we can try that one. Sure, you should. You should try them. But the bet we're making is that the curve of what GitHub is doing will enable us to have all of those features very quickly. And so, we have a great relationship with the GitHub team. We always we talk to them and say, hey, this company's doing this. Are you guys bringing it to GitHub Copilot? And I think there's one other interesting thing people don't maybe necessarily think about, which is sometimes in doing the deep dive on some of these tools, Copilot has decided not to offer something because it actually doesn't work. So for example, right now we talk about generalized models, right? When you use Copilot and autocomplete, everyone's got the same Copilot, right? We all have the same Copilot. And Thomas talked about this morning that potentially you might want to train Copilot on your own repo and then ask it questions. What's interesting is, in a lot of cases, by using a specific model on your repo, it might actually perform worse than the generic model that's trained on all the open source repos. And so in having those conversations with a partner like GitHub allows you to then make the trade-off is like, do you want to do this? It's going to be expensive to train your own model, and it might perform worse. Versus talking to a startup who might say, this is what you need. That's one. Another one is talking about having a Copilot for PR reviews. Right? In early investigations with GitHub, they noticed that the automatic descriptions and commenting that comes back from a PR review that someone might submit might actually just cause them to do work that is not actually that important. And now you're adding developer toil without maybe getting the benefit. And so again, working with a partner like that allows you to think through the second and third order consequences versus just saying, let's use this AI tool, let's give them our data, and they may or may not, it may not be in your best interest to do that. Copilot adoption at Shopify, we have done a lot. Right after that December 2021 email, in January, we launched Copilot with all of our engineers. A year later, Copilot for Business is basically the way of saying that we started paying for it. A year later, in March, we started using some of the tools. You'll notice some of the words here are what was announced today because we've been in early access with GitHub for a while. Right? The ability to have Copilot Docs, Copilot Chat on GitHub.com, Copilot Chat in VS Code, all of the things that you saw demoed this morning. We've been playing with them. And again, what's interesting is you're starting to see which ones developers are gaining confidence in and how their perceptions are changing. But then also which ones are do not yet have product market fit, at least in Shopify, as they get better. And so we'll talk through some of those. But there's a lot happening here that shows you the pace of innovation that's happening and the panacea, which is making sure that your engineers are more productive. So how should we think about this? Right? A lot of this actually came up this morning. with folks, how should you measure developer productivity? I wrote up there, ask McKinsey. I'm kidding. Definitely do not ask McKinsey. That's insane, right? They're a consulting company. What you should be thinking about instead is what matters for your developer community. And if you look at the spectrum of art and science, there are people on both sides, right? There's the science. Let's track 50 different metrics, and let's see if our engineering team is doing well. And then there's the art. Are you building the right thing for your customers? Shopify tends to be on the art side. We really believe that software development and building products is more like pathfinding, right? If you ever see like lightning strike, you see like the ground and you have lightning at the top and it's trying to find a path to the ground. That's what we think software development is. It's not a straight line. It is trying to find a path. You're going forward, you're deleting code, you're prototyping, you're starting over. You start walking towards the horizon and you decide you want to go that way. That is not something that can be numerically assessed easily. And so when I talk to companies, and a lot of CTOs call me and they say, well, how did you decide to use Copilot? I'll talk through some of the metrics we do track and we did find interesting, but one of them is happiness. So it's interesting, and I'll walk through some of these things, but we have found that in doing the quantitative analysis of Copilot is not going to tell you the whole picture. But doing a qualitative analysis might. And again, I talked to lots of companies. Some of them, and again, we don't track that many things. I have like 3 or 4 things that we track here, and again, I'll tell you the reasons we track those. But I talked to lots of companies that track the full DORA space. They use the different tools. I have a list of, I think, 50 different startups that want to connect to your GitHub and give you statistics. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it might be interesting data, but it might not be telling you the whole picture. One story I do want to tell you, I talked to a company that had, I think, 3,000 engineers, and they track 50 different metrics. They deployed Copilot, and the CTO called me and said, we've been running it now for, I think it was 2 or 3 months. They saw nothing, no change. I was like, okay. But he said one thing, and I said, okay, you saw nothing in the numbers, but did you run a developer happiness survey? Did you do any qualitative? He goes, oh, yeah, we did we asked our engineers, and they, off the charts, were saying they were happier at their job and happier using Copilot. So again, we see something similar. It doesn't have to be in the quantitative measurements. It might just be in the qualitative measurements. And when I asked that CTO, again, 3,000 engineers, so they're paying for Copilot, are you going to keep it? He said, of course I'm going to keep it, because the engineers are happier. That is happy engineers, less turnover, more happy at their job, getting towards the solutions faster. Like all those things matter. And so that CTO still rolled out Copilot, even though they saw 0 on the quantitative. Now, I would call bullshit, I think, on the no quantitative change, but that's what he saw and still ended up rolling it out anyway. So what do we look at? So we look at 2 or 3 different things across our ecosystem. Of course, we look at happiness. That is one. We do a developer happiness survey. We want to make sure that we are getting a lot of the qualitative feedback, and we do see high correlation with Copilot and happiness. But we look at some other things. We look at PRs. And again, we're not looking at PRs per week to compare person A and person B and saying, oh, that person has 20 per week and that has 30. It's more about how do we unblock somebody if they're stuck. And so again, we see some correlation with, hey, this person is stuck. They may not have a PR this week. Let's talk to them and see what's going on. We see high correlation with pairing. I love Thomas's whole pair programming. I'm a huge pair programming fan. We believe and feel like Copilot is a pair programmer for your engineers and should be treated like a pair programmer, right? A smart Copilot, right? Funny name. A smart Copilot to work with you while you're going through these problems. That hopefully lets you stay in flow longer than you would have been if you had to go and leave the window and go search something else. One of the amazing things that's happening, and you saw it again this morning's demo, is the ability to have a Copilot chat now in VS Code. So I used to work with a lot of engineers who would cut and paste code, go to ChatGPT, come back, and now you're leaving and going back and forth in these workflows. Having these things in line, highlighting code, and then asking Copilot questions. All that is now just in flow. And again, staying in flow is the name of the game because we know it takes 20 or 30 minutes to get back into flow, and pair programming really helps you stay in flow. So we look at pair programming. We see some correlation there. Of course, I'd mentioned happiness. And we actually really think that this makes a big difference, even if you are not seeing anything on the quantitative, which again, I'll call a little bit of bullshit on that one. For us, what we do see is those engineers who use Copilot, do tend to have some correlation with impact. And I think the key thing to think about in correlation, and I talked about correlation with PRs, correlation with pair programming, correlation with Copilot, is its correlation. You don't know which direction the arrow flows. So for example, I cannot tell if Copilot makes good engineers or if good engineers use Copilot. But I do know that they're correlated. So I don't know if I care which way the arrow goes, right? Because if good engineers want to use Copilot, great. If Copilot makes good engineers, great. Right? If good engineers ship more PRs, great. If more PRs makes good engineers, great. Like, it doesn't matter to me which way the arrow goes. But again, I'm not trying to be too scientific. For us, it is an art form to try to think and dissect these types of results. And that's how folks should think about it in their company, right? I want to have my engineers focus on the thing that matters more for them. And so in pair programming, and again, Copilot, you don't want to look at lines of code, because in a lot of times, it's less code that you want, right? And I mentioned that, maybe I should be ashamed that I have the largest Ruby code base in the world, instead of actually saying this is something to celebrate. I would like less code. I would like to subtract more code. I would like my system to be more simple. It allows me to reason about it better. And as these tools get better, I want Copilot to come to me and say, delete this module, delete this code. Here's a simpler way of approaching this solution. That's what we want to see. And that's why the pair programming paradigm is actually a much better metaphor, I think, because the idea is that you are pairing with somebody. There's one thing that we did try, actually, in pair programming, if folks have done it, it's 2 engineers, 1 machine, but 2 keyboards, 2 mice, and they work together, is I did try to hack together via the accessibility mode this idea of a voice Copilot. So the idea that I could just talk to Copilot and it would talk back to me while I coded instead of actually doing it by the typing interface. I couldn't get it to work exactly, but I think that's coming as well, where you actually could have like almost a more natural interface than typing. So I'm going to share some survey data, and again, this is the qualitative data that we had at Shopify about how often folks were using Copilot, what they felt about it, how useful they found it. And again, you're seeing some pretty high scores for some of the products that have been out. In our case, like, we've been using Copilot for, almost 2 years now. And when we talk about Copilot, we talk about, right, I'm talking about the autocomplete of Copilot, right? The generalized model autocomplete. And again, those models are getting better, right? We heard it was GPT 3.5 and then GPT 3.5 Turbo. We saw that OpenAI launched GPT 4 Turbo, which hopefully is fast enough for autocomplete. And we'll start seeing these get even better. And as you go down from that, you see some of the other products that GitHub launched, some of them announced today, that yet don't have product market fit with Shopify, but again, we just launched them, right? GitHub CLI, GitHub Copilot for GitHub Copilot Chat, Copilot Chat in VS Code, GitHub Copilot for Docs. All these things we think will have great adoption as they find product market fit inside Shopify. Again, still early days for us, but you can start seeing that the numbers are actually quite high, right? 70% useful, 75% use it all the time. Some numbers, we do have lots and lots of folks using Copilot. It's funny, when I talk to different teams, I feel like, let's say it's about 70% of engineering is using Copilot. I think that number is low. I talk to other engineering leaders, they think the number is high. It depends on what your goals are. Right? In my mind, we are seeing that there's a slight correlation between using Copilot and having great impact. Again, don't know which way the arrow goes, but it's interesting to see why people don't use Copilot, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We have lots of engineers who have used it for 6 months or more. I think one of the interesting things there is acceptance rate. Again, I have lots of debates with people. Is 26%, 25%, 15%, 30%? Are those high numbers or low numbers? So for us, I believe those are high numbers. What that's saying is almost 1 in 4 times we are accepting the suggestion from Copilot. Now, you could take the pessimistic view and be like, wow, so 3 out of 4 times you're not taking the suggestion? I'm like, sure. But what happens in some cases is you don't take the suggestion, but you take the idea. Oh, I see where you're going. And then you don't take the suggestion, but then you write something similar, or you get an idea that it's now prompted you towards. In this morning's keynote, right, we heard, I don't want to start with the blank page. And this is exactly where Copilot excels, because you can write a comment, and it can start writing some code for you. Even if it's wrong, it starts you off in the right direction. Or even, by the way, in the wrong direction. But that is something for you to get started with and then edit. And then, of course, at Shopify, Ruby is the #1 language we use there, and you can see that that's the most popular language that GitHub Copilot gives us suggestions for. But we do see varying rates. We do see from 15% to 30% acceptance rate across our repos, depending on the language. Again, more survey data at Qualitative. We do see things becoming, as people get more comfortable, more and more folks using it over time. And again, this is engineers getting more comfortable. As more IDEs get supported by GitHub as well, we can start tracking this data better. And we are starting to see more and more of the senior engineers also picking up Copilot, where at the beginning, I think they felt it was like a beginner tool. So I want to go through, again, some more qualitative data, and just specifically here to show you the difference between what we saw at the mid-year and at the end of the year. So what's interesting is, as people, when you start asking these questions, right, we can see that their people's perceptions of what Copilot can do change. So for example, people originally felt like, I'm going to get more productivity, it's going to help me with repetitive code, it's going to help me writing tests. And over time, you can see how they started changing to say, actually, you know what? I'm actually getting productivity boosts. It's actually smartly completing my code. And so even their perception of using the models, and as we all know, behind the scenes, the models are getting better. It's learning. But the people are also learning. Copilot is not something that you drop into your organization and it's just going to be something that people adopt and they don't change. They're going to change with Copilot. We see this with any new tool. Right? What's the Marshall McLuhan line, right? First you get the tool, you shape the tools and the tool shapes you. That's what happens with Copilot. You start working with Copilot as your pair programmer. And again, you start seeing how people change their perception of what they thought they were going to learn with Copilot with what they actually do. And what's interesting here is you start seeing how people are actually thinking through how they want to use Copilot. Maybe they're going to start something in a new language that they never used before because they're now feeling like they can get over that barrier. Right? At Shopify, for example, our systems programming language is Rust. And we are seeing people who start using Rust more because they're now not afraid because they've got a Copilot to come along with them. Again, more survey data. And you're seeing, again, what people are feeling like they are going to be helped with in the mid-year and where they end up. Right? So people do feel that are appreciating it is a tool that saves time. And if you're saving time and, again, replacing tasks, there is a cost benefit to that, although it's hard, again, to quantify. Right? I talk to a lot of, again, CTOs and CFOs who want to quantify the results of a Copilot or any AI tools, and it's tough to do. Unlike a cost like your salary, it's very easy to quantify. It's hard to say, oh, well, these people are happier and got to the solution faster, even though they produced potentially less code. Or they were not daunted by starting a new project in a language they didn't know because they had Copilot helping them. So again, trying to justify the cost only quantitatively might be super tough. And maybe not something you actually want to do because it might take you away from actually having your eyes on the prize, which is using it for a while changes the way developers interact with the tool. Right? One of the things I like to say is it's kind of like surgery. You don't want to leave halfway. You want to deploy it for, I would say, a quarter or two before you actually get a feel for whether it's working or not. And again, in many organizations, I just talked to somebody this morning who was thinking about Copilot and how to roll it out in their trial group and whether to look at those metrics and then determine should we roll it out for the whole company. And again, only looking at quantitative, it might be hard because they want to figure out, well, how many lines of code did it write? Or what was the acceptance rate? Or how much faster, what's our velocity? Again, looking at the art and science line, it may be hard to see. But looking at the qualitative, it does tend to show up pretty quickly. And of course, in some of these things, you see that, is Copilot going to generate my boilerplate code for me? Yeah, the answer is yes. And what we find with engineers is they're more able, especially the more senior you get, they're more able to spend their time in the more complicated parts of the program, the parts that actually are value added versus the boilerplate code and the repetitive code or the tests that they feel like might not be where they want to spend most of their time. Again, here's some data on Copilot chat beta. This is actually, again, things that were announced this morning. We're seeing some interesting data coming through on how our engineers use the various parts of Copilot to stay in flow. Thomas mentioned this morning, Copilot workspaces, which again is a way to keep you in the flow of your development cycle, so you're not reaching for other tools, not going outside of Copilot, not going to ChatGPT on the web, not going to, I don't know if people go to Stack Overflow anymore, not going to those tools. Because what's happening is you're trying to integrate everything into one single IDE. And what's interesting about that is, again, staying in flow. That's what pair programming is about. That's what Copilot is trying to do. Right? It's trying to help you improve productivity. And again, you can see what people are thinking about in terms of the things that they want from Copilot. Again, on the qualitative side, you want to make sure that you are thinking through the entire solution. And if you're an engineering organization that is not doing a developer happiness survey or not doing any kind of qualitative analysis, you're probably missing out on a plethora of feedback that could be helping you drive your engineering org forward. Somebody clapped? I don't know. One clap for that one. Okay, cool. So now Copilot does have a learning curve. And what I mean by that is it is not something you drop and then it's like, take it easy, everyone. We just put this new tool in. Hope it is working. Like, that's not how I would launch anything. I talked, at the beginning of the presentation really about bringing AI into your workflow across the company and your customers and your employees in a way such that this is one of a suite of tools that your team might actually adopt. It's a powerful one, and you saw in that, that tweet I showed where after sales and marketing, engineering is one that comes up there. But there are things that you have to work differently around with Copilot. The way you write comments completely changes with Copilot. So for anybody who's used Copilot, they know that by writing comments is how you prompt the machine, right? And of course, we saw today that you can now use Copilot Chat to generate boilerplate code as well. But what is a main difference is how you write comments. And you're not just writing comments, again, for you. You are, of course, writing them for you, or the future you, who's going to be forgetting about this code in 2 weeks. But it's also for Copilot. And Copilot is going to make a guess as to what code you're trying to write. And it does change the interaction model. You have to get used to the autocomplete, because what happens is you're going to have the grayed out text and you're going to either accept it or not accept it. Again, what I have seen is even when I don't accept the code, it's now priming me with ideas that I might want to use to then actually write something else. So the acceptance rate may or may not be an actual indication of how well it's working, because potentially it's priming me for some other type of development that I might want to do. It is not perfect. Copilot makes mistakes. We saw one in the demo this morning. Humans make mistakes also. Your pair programmer makes mistakes. You will make mistakes. You still have to be a good engineer to work with Copilot. So for the doomsdayers about AI out there saying, hey, Copilot or these tools are going to replace engineers, that is not true. It's going to make you more effective. It is going to replace some of your tasks, but it's not going to replace you. And the reason for that is because you're going to still have to understand what the code is. That's still going to happen. And yeah, you can try to write some things, but as soon as you try to modify, you want to make sure you are still getting a feel for what is being developed. And again, this is true of a pair programmer also, right? Like, you shouldn't sit with somebody and they write a bunch of code and you don't understand it. Like, you should understand the code that's being written. And by the way, like, it will make mistakes, just like a human, right? Now, the tools are going to get better and better, but it is a workflow change. And I think what's interesting about it is keeping you in flow is the key. Now, here's an example of one. I just literally did this last week when I was writing this deck, where I was like, let me just open up Copilot and actually just write a sample code. And as you can see, I just created an array, and right away, Copilot, I actually should have done a better job of like highlighting what Copilot wrote and what I wrote. But Copilot wrote a for loop at the beginning, which just iterated through my array from 1 to 100, 0 to 100, and instead of using the array length. And you can see right away, that's just poor code. Because if I change the length of the array, the for loop will not work as intended. But now what's interesting is the comments that I wrote, I was prompting Copilot. So I said, iterate through the array. It wrote the right code. It actually used the array length. And then I said, print the array. It wrote the right code. It used the array length. But the first loop is wrong. Right? Now, there's nothing there that's telling me except, good engineering practices that potentially it's making a mistake. It's not thinking through the problem in a way that's going to be maintainable later, right? This will probably just work, and then someday someone will come in and be like, this array is too short, change it, and now everything will not work. So again, just a very simple example. You can open up your own IDE and try this. But the idea is the models will get better, and you will get better at identifying things like this. This is a super spicy topic because at Shopify we hire lots and lots of engineers, and I talk to a lot of engineering leaders, and they say, well, my interview process now is all screwed because they're just going to use Copilot. And now I can't tell if they're a good engineer or if Copilot's a good engineer. And I was like, well, if Copilot can do your interview questions, maybe your interview questions are dumb. Because, yes, Copilot is going to get better, and people are going to get smarter, and people are going to become more effective. And we ran this trial at Shopify where right now we allow candidates to use Copilot. We tell them about it in the process, and we say, you can use Copilot. And it doesn't have to be Copilot. It can be any of the AI productivity tools, because we believe that actually we get to more interesting questions by using these tools, right? That's one reason. The other reason is your interview process should be almost the same as your job, right? So if you use Copilot at work, use AI assistants at work, then you want to allow your candidates to use the same tools, because then you can tell whether they would be good at this job, right? It's weird to be like, we can't use Copilot in the interview, but then you will use it at work. I'm like, well, are you testing the same things then? And so for us, we do use it at work. We allow it. We don't discount you if you don't want to use it, although I'm sure there's going to be some future state where if I ask a candidate, are you going to use Copilot, and they say no, I'm going to be like, why? Because it's weird. It's like, here's a bunch of numbers, add them up. You want to use a calculator? No. Why? Like, I'm just interested. Now, right now, it's not really fair because they might be coming from a company that they don't have Copilot. And you're like, I don't want you to learn how to use Copilot in the interview, so it's fair. But over time, it's going to be weird that you don't use an AI assistant in your coding interview. And one interesting anecdote is I do a lot of interview shadowing. I talk to lots of engineers, and I shadow the interviewer because I want to evaluate the interviewer. And I will turn off my camera and mic and just watch candidates. And whenever there's a candidate who's not using Copilot, what I've noticed, because I tend to try to do the same questions as the candidates to kind of see if the questions are ones I think would help evaluate an engineer correctly, is every time I have a candidate that's not using Copilot and I tend to finish the question twice as fast. So if a candidate has 90 minutes to do a question, I tend to finish it in 45 minutes. I leave the call, send my solution to the interviewer to be marked just like the candidate. But what's funny is an old, rusty programmer like me can actually quickly get up to speed, finish these problems in a way that is very, very fast. So just some ideas around legal. This is the number one thing I hear from engineering leaders. How should I think about the legal aspect of code being generated by open source repos by Copilot? Now, here are two press releases. I didn't get a chance to put the third one in, which is OpenAI has a thing called Copyright Shield, right, which is the idea that they're going to help indemnify you. One of those is from Microsoft, one of those posts, one's from Google. And basically what they're saying is, we will indemnify you if you get sued for using our tools. That's interesting. I don't think that's the thing that you want to rely upon. I think the real answer is to work with your legal team early and often to think through how you want to deploy these types of tools in your company. So imagine your designers want to use Midjourney, same idea. You should be talking to your team about how to use these things versus just saying at the end of the process, by the way, we're going to use this tool. Help me get this through procurement legal. Like, that's not how to work with your team. All right, so what have we seen so far at Shopify? I mentioned 70% of the engineers. And about 26% of the code completion. We are almost at 1 million lines of code written by Copilot. Pretty amazing. Still a small amount of code in the Shopify sense, but still amazing that Copilot is being that productive for us, that we have this amount of code in our repos already. And you can see there are almost 700,000 acceptances by engineers of the Copilot suggestion, right? And the reason that those numbers are different is because a Copilot suggestion is one thing, but it might generate like 10 lines of code. And so that's not even including all the prompting that you get that might make you land in a direction that is fruitful, but you don't accept the suggestion, in which case it won't even show up in these stats, right? It won't show up in the lines of code. It won't show up in the acceptance rate. So it's probably higher than that. Cool. And then, of course, happier engineers, right? Which is something we should all strive for. All right. And then lastly, it's not all roses. There are some things that Copilot, we hear from people who don't use Copilot. Right? It gets in the way. It feels like I'm cheating, which is an interesting one. Right? We hear that from candidates. I don't trust it. right? So we do see some of it around too slow, that'll get fixed, or the suggestions are not that good. These will get better over time. But again, just for your organizational purview, you can start thinking through why an engineer may or may not want to use Copilot. In summary, reach for AI early and often. And if you're using GitHub, it's a no-brainer to use Copilot. Thank you very much.